talking about the Xendesktop 5 and 5.5 PowerShell SDK and how they have changed everything prior, using MFCOM, and when they switched to FMA, the FMA structure, they changed everything to PowerShell, and which is really cool and really awesome and all that stuff. But it's a little confusing to a lot of people to understand how it works. So in Xendesktop 5, the only way to get data as far as the architecture and infrastructure is concerned, the only way to change stuff is through PowerShell. So I wanted to talk about that and talk about all the commandlets that they have. My name is Brandon Shell. That's my blog. That's my Twitter. I do far more stuff here than I do on my blog these days. I like to say that Brian Madden killed my blog because he got me doing Twitter, and since I started doing Twitter, I don't blog ever because I'm a pretty terse person anyway. So 140 characters is perfect. I'm like, I can say whatever I want in 140 characters. So anyway, I tweet on that. To really sit way back there, huh?
I know, come on forward. Scared. So before we get started, just a quick reminder. So these slips that I just handed out to you guys are actually the ones you want to fill out at the end of the session to give us and Brandon your honest feedback. The ones that are in your packets, you can throw away. We had a few last-minute changes with the agenda, so these slips are the ones that you want to fill out for another entry for 50 pounds, and that the winner's going to be announced at closing remarks, so you have to be present to win. Then also those yellow surveys that you received earlier, those need to be handed in ASAP for a chance to win the Kindle Fire. Again, appreciate your honest feedback. It helps us know how we can improve for next year. So if you didn't grab, if you don't have a green form or a yellow form, I have some extras at the back, so make sure you grab those. And do we want to wait for Jason? Or you want to keep going?
No, we can go. That's fine.
All right. Take it away.
Yep. So basic contents, we're going to be doing, I'm going to do an introduction, which is what I'm doing now. We'll do a quick PowerShell review, just kind of go over some PowerShell basics. It's kind of key to understanding some of the things that they did and how it works. To understand PowerShell is kind of critical to that. We'll talk about Xendesktop 5X, and then we'll look at the Xendesktop commandlets. And then I'll show you how you can use the GUI. One of the really cool things they did with Xendesktop 5 and 5.5 is they, everything that the GUI does, it actually uses PowerShell under the covers to perform its functionality. So if there's something that you want to learn how to automate or script, you can actually just go do it in the GUI and then go look at the commands that it basically just did, and then you can wrap that into a script. So you can actually have the GUI teach you PowerShell and teach you how to use the Xendesktop PowerShell commandlets to automate your environment. I'm a PowerShell MVP. Have been for, I want to say this is my 5th year, or I'm going on 6 years or something like that. Anyway, been a PowerShell MVP for a while. I've been a Citrix CTP, which is Citrix Technology Professional. Community Tech Previews. Looks for Community Tech Previews. That's like, I don't know where they got the acronym. It's the worst acronym ever for a awards program. But Citrix CTP, I've been a CTP, I guess, 3 or 4 years. I don't know. Didn't you read the door? Doesn't it say don't enter here?
But I'm looking for trouble.
It does. It's not listening to my sign.
Yes, look at this. He's, anyway, so whether you like it or not, we're going to throw shirts at you. If you want Splunk shirts, I also work for Splunk. This is not going to have anything to do with Splunk, so don't worry about that. But we have Splunk shirts if you want them. They're really cool. They're black with white writing. You can't go wrong. That's my motif. I'm a practice manager at Splunk. My primary job at Splunk right now has been bringing Splunk value to the Citrix world, building products or Splunk products so that we have value in the Citrix world. That is really bad. Can you, I don't know what the hell I was smoking here. Yeah, that says my blog, but we've already talked about all that, so Apparently I had to introduce myself twice because I'm so important, I guess. I don't know. PowerShell review. How many of you guys use PowerShell? That's more hands than normal. So yeah, every year it's more and more people. Do you use PowerShell on a daily basis, weekly basis? Weekly? Yeah, weekly. Is it primarily around the Xendesktop Xen app world, or do you do other Exchange? Active Directory, yeah. What do you use? Do you use the Quest stuff? So much better than the Microsoft stuff, isn't it? Yeah. Did you? I have a blog post, by the way, on using PowerShell and SDS protocols, because the AD stuff, the Microsoft stuff, and the Quest stuff are so horribly slow in large environments that you have to use raw protocols. But anyway, completely unrelated to this. But so PowerShell, you can be broken down into what we call commandlets, or you can break it down into concepts of commandlets. So depending on who you talk to, people call stuff different things. I know that's a little frustrating from a terminology standpoint. I like to just say commandlets are basically tools that you use inside of PowerShell, or commands that you use inside of PowerShell. I include in what we call commandlets function scripts and actual commandlets. As far as native PowerShell terminology, what a commandlet is a binary, basically a binary function that resides in memory that you don't see, that does something specific. Example would be like get services, get printer, or anything like that. Those are all commandlets, and they're in memory, and they're introduced into the environment by like a DLL or something like that. Functions are things that you write or some other developer has written that you can load into your profile or load in via .source in a script or something like that, that will provide commandlet type functionality, but it's just script. It's not binary code, right? It's not C# or anything like that. Scripts are obviously just like any other scripts. One thing about PowerShell I like to try to explain to people, it's not like your typical scripting development language. You don't actually have to learn how to write looping code and all that stuff to get a lot of value out of PowerShell. It's very similar in context of like a batch file, where it's do this, done. Right? There's no do this, and if it completes, do this, else do this. You have that ability to do that, but you don't have to do that. You can just process, and you'll see that when we start looking at the Xendesktop GUI and how it does stuff. It's very batch oriented in the way that it does stuff. Any questions on the commandlets? I need water. You have anything to say over there, Jason? Or are you just going to sit there?
When something appropriate comes up.
Okay.
Let's see. Brandon, here's a question.
This isn't stage or anything, right?
No, it really is not. He asked me the last minute to come. I was like, what do you want me to do? I'll be the annoying audience member and ask questions. All right, so Brandon, what do you, can you tell me about the PowerShell and what do you need? What does it run on top of?
So PowerShell is a .NET language. It's built on top of .NET. When the founders of PowerShell were building this language, actually kind of leads into the next thing, which is objects, objects, objects. Everything in PowerShell is an object. And the reason why that's important is because when you're in DOS or command prompt or whatever you like to call it, when you type a command like ping, what do you get back?
Reply.
Yeah, you get a reply. That reply is what? It's just text, right? I like to say it's a string, but it's not really even a string. It really is just text. It's like stuff written directly to the console. You can redirect that into another script, but then whatever that other script is, it has to take that input, parse it, try to figure out what is what, and then kind of act on that. We've been doing that for years and years and years in the Unix world and Windows world in regards to the way that historical scripting and development worked. The problem with that is if Microsoft or whoever wrote ping, right, decides to change the output just slightly, any script that was built on top of that output now ceases to function. So anytime there was a change to a text pattern, everyone would have to go change all their code to address that. This is no longer a problem with PowerShell because everything in PowerShell is an object. And what does that mean? What is an object? An object is basically a bit of, it's a structure, and it has like properties and fields and methods. Like a human's an object, right? We have properties like hair color, eye color, weight. We have that kind of stuff. And we have methods like sleep, eat, go to sleep, that sounds good. Sleep, 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 sleep. And we have, that kind of stuff, right? Basically, and you put all that stuff together, you put all that description together, and that's how you classify or define a user or a person. With PowerShell, everything is an object. For example, a file. If I do something like get file or get child item, and I get back a file, I don't just get back the text representation of that, like you would with dir, right? I get back an object with properties. Properties like length, file size, when created, last changed, all the stuff that we want to have access. All the stuff that you would have went through the trouble of having to parse off and pull off of direct, if you did a dir, to get value out of that output. Does that make sense? So the fact that PowerShell is object-based, we've basically eliminated a majority of the need for parsing of data. Because when we pass, if we do get child item and we pipe it to something, we don't pass the text along like we used to do it. We actually pass the object along. So whenever the next commandlet gets that object, it can just pull off whatever properties. An example would be whereObject. WhereObject is a PowerShell commandlet that lets you filter. So I could say, get child item, pipe it to where $_, which is the current item, dot name equals something. And it'll go through and it'll look at every object, file object that comes in. It says, do you match? Nope, you don't match, match, match. Oh, you match, so I'll keep passing you on. And it'll drop anyone that doesn't match. The way that we get that power, the reason why we're able to get that power is because of objects. Now, back to your question. Instead of, so they had, when they were building PowerShell, they knew they wanted to have an object-based scripting language. So they were kind of toying with, okay, so what do we do? Do we come up with our own object model? How do we get all our objects? And how do we create, because for objects to exist, they have to have classifications, they have to have definitions, they have to be defined, right? I can't have you having one user object that looks completely different than his user object, right? It's just not going to work. So I kind of need a common schema, a common class structure, so that when you say user and you say user, we end up with the same, at least relatively close definitions of what a user is, right? So they were going through this process, and what they decided to do is, hey, we're Microsoft. We have this thing called .NET. Everything in .NET's an object. Let's use that. For good or bad, there's some negative impact that came from that, but there's a lot of positive impact from that. Because they adopted the .NET framework, they automatically had class structures and definitions for a majority of almost everything that a consumer would want to use, or a consumer from Microsoft's side perspective. Right, so they instantly had a huge swath of properties and objects and definitions. So they didn't have to spend years building this framework. The framework was just instantly there for them. So PowerShell v2 was built on .NET 2. PowerShell v3 is going to be built on, so PowerShell v1 and v2 were on .NET 2. PowerShell v3 is going to most likely be based on .NET 4.
Do you know when PowerShell 3 is going to be about?
When Windows 8 is available. Trying to figure out a safe way to answer that question.
He does know.
On camera. Yeah. I suspect what you'll see is you'll definitely see PowerShell v3 release with Windows 8 since it's actually in the operating system. So it will be with Windows 8. Whenever you will see probably If I go by historical reference, PowerShell v2 was shipped with Windows 7, so that's when we saw PowerShell v2. And then we saw PowerShell v2 for XP and other operating systems about 2 to 3 months after Windows 7 shipped. I suspect we'll see something similar along that line. So Windows 8, I've heard all kinds of rumors on when that's going to happen. Sometimes some as early as November, some as late as January or February next year.
Worldwide Windows Server 8 Technology Roadshow that has already started around the world, so expect Windows 8 to drop out of beta very, very soon.
Drop out a beta.
Out of beta.
Out of beta. Into release candidate.
Into release candidate. Into release for web. Into. So.
Yeah. So anyway, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Wasn't quite sure there, but so that's why we use, or why we're built on .NET, or that we're built on .NET, and why. So any other questions on that? So PowerShell, one of the things the founders kind of wanted to also do was help it to be self-discoverable, meaning that the idea is I don't want you to have to learn PowerShell, I don't want you to have to go download PowerShell, install it, and then spend 3 weeks on the web trying to figure out how to do stuff. Granted, there's a lot of content on the web, and every year it gets greater and greater. But the idea is that they wanted to make sure that you could get as much internal help as possible. So there's a commandlet called get help with parameters of detailed, full, and example. A detailed will give you slightly more detailed than the default output. Full will give you everything that PowerShell knows about the commandlet that you're asking for help. And example will provide just examples. So if you just want to, like if you're using a commandlet and you're like, you know, I wonder how I could use this commandlet, you could just say get help, the name of the commandlet, dash example, and it will give you back examples with hopefully, if it's well written, with the Microsoft stuff, it's pretty good. It's hit or miss with vendors. Obviously, Microsoft can't control what vendors do. But the Quest stuff is pretty good, yeah? Has anyone used the Exchange stuff? They have pretty good help, yeah? And Citrix stuff, it's all right. It's better than, right now Citrix, in my opinion, is batting about 50-50 on PowerShell. They have 2 products that really did a spectacular job with PowerShell. The Xenapp and Xendesktop guys, great job. There's some things they messed up on, but you know, hey, I'll take what I can move. I keep hiding from the light bulb. Yeah. That's what I do. It's bright. I keep moving because I can't see. Anyway, so Xenapp, Xendesktop, I think they did a really good job. I think they could have done some things better, but they did a really good job. PVS and Xenserver are to be perfectly frank, they're just shit. They did such a horrible job. It's like, are you the same company? I mean, the PVS guys went back asswards, right? They did 2 things that were just fundamentally proved they had no idea what PowerShell was, and did not know. Someone said you have to do PowerShell, so they like recompiled the code to work in PowerShell, and that was about the extent of it. Which is they did, instead of being verb noun, so PowerShell has a very specific naming scheme to make it easy to discover, such as, you know, get help, get service. If you don't know anything about PowerShell, my wife can sit down and I can tell her, you know, just a basic, you know, 3-minute spiel about PowerShell, and she can start doing stuff. She may not be like advanced, but she can at least do some like, if I tell you it's verb noun and I tell you that get is a valid verb, how would you get services? My wife would be like, get services. There you go, right? Easy, right? Well, except for when a company does it backwards, and instead of doing, they're like, well, we could have like 250 commandlets, or we can have 7. So they're like, let's have a MC CLI get, and an MC CLI add, and an MC CLI remove, and then we'll just add 1,000 parameters to the command for if I want to add a disk or add a server, or you got to be back. And on top of that, I just spent the whole time explaining to you why PowerShell decided to use objects. Guess what they output? They intentionally overwrite the object to make it output in text. It's like, I'm like, you could have saved yourself a lot of work and just outputted the object. But no, they deserialize the object into text and then output that.
So the crappy thing about that is, you know object orientation, you know object inheritance, and then every object in PowerShell inherits from a parent object called PS object. And by default, if you just write that out, it has a two-string method that's implied that will just by default write string out. So they had to overwrite that as well.
Yeah, it's really funny that they actually had to go out of their way to make this bad. But they did it. Success! Now, along that lines, the other group is the Xenserver guys. And they did a little better, except they did crazy stuff like putting semicolons and dashes, colons and semicolons in the actual name. So it's like get dash server colon VM. I'm like, you know, that's, why would you do that? It's like they probably had to do some special magic to make those that work. But the reason why they did that is because they were trying to, they had an SDK that had specific methods that looked a specific way. So they're like, let's get that, we'll make it PowerShell. So they had a function called get server colon VM. So they made a commandlet. They're like, let's just put a dash there, and that's our name. As opposed to thinking through exactly what they should have done. If you look at Hyper-V in VMware, right? They just said, you know, get dash VM instead of get dash server colon VM. Like, what other kind of VM is there, right? Anyway, you were going to say something?
Oh, I'm saying, you know, Xenserver, they have their own object model, so they even generate their online help via from the source code. So they kind of did the same thing with the PowerShell stuff.
Yeah.
To make their lives easier, but the administrators' lives harder.
Yeah. So yeah, what he's saying is that they have a program that goes through their SDK and just starts. It actually generates code based on their code. So it's like self-generating. So they don't have to do anything. They're just like double-click and commandlets. We support PowerShell, which is not necessarily true. But anyway, if you want to be able to find or discover commandlets or commands that are inside your PowerShell run space currently, you can use the commandlet get command. You can also pass it parameters, like if you want to get all the commands for a specific verb, or you want to see all the commands for a specific noun, or noun wildcard, such as the quest stuff. If I want to see all the quest commandlets, I can do get dash QA or get command noun is QA star, right? And that will give me all the quest commandlets. Or for XenApp, I can say get command XA star, and that will give me all the XenApp commandlets, right? Because they do prefixing. So that's another thing that's really important for vendors to do. When you're talking about a naming scheme, the problem is GetVM is a perfect example, right? Who owns GetVM? Is it Microsoft's? Does it belong to VMware? Does it belong to Xenserver? They all three have VMs. So who gets to use the actual GetVM? So the idea is that you should always prefix, and Citrix was really good about this in both the Xendesktop and the XenApp commandlets, of saying, okay, well, it's very possible that there could be multiple applications. Like there's a lot of server products, there are a lot of products out there that may have a concept of get application. So they didn't say, well, we're just going to take get application and be done with it. What they decided to do is prefix the noun portion with get XA application, right? Get XA server. So the XA determines that this is a XenApp server or a XenApp application, so that they have a very clear way of saying, no, this is our space, leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, and there isn't any fighting over who owns get application. Because what will happen is if you're in an environment such as, there's a lot of companies out there that use multiple hypervisors. They use XenApp, they use Xenserver, and they use VMware, and they use Hyper-V. So if you have the same guy managing all three environments, when he loads his PowerShell commandlets and snap-ins and he does get VM, what VM is he getting? Right? He may have a get VM from Hyper-V, he may have a get VM for VMware. Whichever one was loaded last is going to be the one he has, but it's not going to be easy for him to discover exactly what that is. So this guy right here is your best friend when you're first starting to learn PowerShell. Get member is your best friend. And that is because PowerShell is object-based and everything in PowerShell is a .NET object, that means everything in PowerShell has properties and methods. Right? It has data that it can give you. And that data is what you're after. So you need to be able to figure out exactly what that data looks like. Get member is what does this. Get member is what we call a reflector. So it looks at the object and it says, okay, this is a file system object. When I talk to the file system object, these are the properties that it says it has. So get member will say, for a file system object, these are all the properties that you can reference. And it'll tell you the data types and all that stuff, but you don't necessarily have to get into that just yet. But the idea is that get member is very, very important. And also know that PowerShell supports the concept of format files. So file system is also a good example of that. When you do a dir and you get the format that looks like dir used to look like, that isn't obviously what's there. There's a lot of properties and values that you don't see. PowerShell uses what they call a format file, which means it says, when you see this .NET object type and you're writing it out to the console, unless they've specified otherwise, this is what I want it to look like. And the idea is that the console still needs to be usable. I can't be just throwing stuff on it constantly. An example of that would be, what the heck just happened? So there's a lot of data there. The other option would have been to do something like this would have been the default behavior without a format file, because that's useful, right? It's not really useful. So I use a format file to say, yeah, I know these are a lot of properties, but if I do a dir, this is really what's useful for most people, which is file attributes, date, time, stamp, name. That's it. They don't need it. Generally speaking, when they're visually looking at it, they don't need anything else. Any questions on that? Oh, so that was PowerShell. Any questions on the PowerShell before we move on to Xendesktop? How many of you guys use Xendesktop 5? 3 of you. Well, the rest of y'all use 4? Or used, like, I just want to go somewhere and sit. Okay. So Xendesktop 4 is completely different than Xendesktop 5. Did y'all go from Xendesktop 4 to 5, or did you just start with 5? Lucky guy. You started off with 5 too? Anyone start with 4?
I've still got 5.
You got 5, yeah? Well, I mean, by 5. Oh, you have 4. Oh, yeah. Which one do you like better? 5. Yeah, yeah. I like the management of 5 better. But I like the predictability of 4 a little better. But that's just me. Anyway, so big differences between Xendesktop 4 and 5. With Xendesktop, we've always had the concept, ever since Xendesktop 2, right? We've always had this concept of a DDC. This is our desktop delivery controller. They're now starting to call it broker, because you know how like Citrix likes to rename stuff because it's confusing and it gives their marketing guys a chance to like do something. I don't know why they change shit constantly, but anyway, so.
With that particular example, I agree with it. Broker's the industry term, so I can't.
I'm not arguing. I'm just saying, you know, pick a horse and stick with it, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you screw up, own your screw up. Anyway, so it is now called broker, and this is the guy that's responsible for saying, hey, you user, go to this VM. It maintains state of virtual machines or the VDAs, who's available, who isn't available, and then also maintains a list of the users and what machines they're allowed to go to and kind of connects the dots. I've used the term VDA a few times. VDA is just an acronym for Virtual Desktop Agent. This is also kind of a misnomer. It does not have to be virtual. VDA can be, and actually, we were one of my company that I used to work for a while back was one of the first companies to actually do the kind of, we call it the go-to PC model of Xendesktop, which is we had physical desktops at the office. They were really powerful. You know, we had SSDs. We had really nice boxes. So there was no reason for us to throw those away. We were using them all the time. But we had a work from home program. We wanted to be able to access that resources from home. So we kind of did the kind of go to my PC model. And so in our case, the VDAs were almost all physical. We did have a small DR farm that was all virtual, but it's just the agent. For you XenApp guys, it's basically like XenApp on it's like a XenApp server on the desktop agent, on the desktop that lets you connect to ICA. That's really what it is.
Actually, I started out naming Fort ICA.
Yes.
Pika.
Pika. Pika.
And to what Brandon just said,
Pikachu.
Xendesktop, Citrix did just announce remote, what do they call it now, remote PC? Or
It's something I've been begging them for years and years and years.
So that Brandon described in his environment, actually Citrix advertises now for it. I guess really the only difference is.
You know, I won't claim ownership of that or anything, but we are the ones that made that happen. No, we're the ones that made that happen. Like we spent lots of money with Citrix, and then it wouldn't work. It's like they had so much trouble just doing like RDP type functionality because of the way that they hijack the drivers and stuff like that. It just with Windows 7, it's like, it doesn't work. So they had to redo the ICA drivers to make that work. Anyway, so virtual desktop agent that's the guy that sits there. It registers with the broker, and it's what will happen is a user comes in, the broker will tell the VDA, hey, get prepared to listen, because they don't listen all the time. The VDA doesn't listen for ICA traffic all the time. It only listens when it's told to listen. So the VDA is the one responsible for turning that stuff on and off. Make sense? Yep. We have, because, you know, it's not Citrix unless it's complex. And Xendesktop 4, we used to just have desktop groups. And that was apparently not enough. Now we need to have catalogs. Easiest way to understand catalogs is their classifications of types of machines. So let's say you would have a group of physical machines and you would have a group of virtual machines. You would put those in catalogs, and then you would publish those catalogs through desktop groups to users. So the catalogs are the groups of machines. You have users. Desktop groups are what join the catalogs and the users together. Make sense? In Xendesktop 5, they totally did away with IMA finally. And in Jasper, they will do away with IMA for XenApp. At least that's the story. Because IMA is great, but was never meant to do what IMA is trying to do. Like Xendesktop, it was never meant to be deployed in that scenario, right? IMA was always meant to be one server, or just a couple of dozen servers, or up to I think 1,000 servers in a farm. But outside of that, it wasn't meant to grow to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of desktops, right? So they had to choose. Hey, look, if Xendesktop is going to take off, or if virtual desktop virtualization is going to take off, and it's going to be in environments where we have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of desktops, we can't rely on IMA. It just does not scale. So they did away with IMA, and they're on this thing called FMA. And in Xendesktop 5, we went to, thank God, registry-based location by default, instead of doing Active Directory-based craziness. They were trying to be good Microsoft citizens, in my opinion, but it was a stupid thing to do. And I think they realized that in Xendesktop 5, they reversed course and said, well, we'll still support Active Directory lookup and discovery, but by default, we're going to use registry as our, and for those of you, registry-based location is just how the VDA determines what broker it's supposed to register with. Right, so the VDA has to tell somebody, hey, I'm waiting for a user, so let me know when I can start listening. It has to register with somebody. And by default, in Xendesktop 4, Active Directory registration was the only way to do that. In Xendesktop 5, they made the default registration behavior registry, although AD is still supported. They added some ICA metrics in Xendesktop 5 that they did not have in 4.0. That's more of just a bump in functionality. So the other thing that they did in Xendesktop 5 is they cut the cord with 32-bit. or as far as cut the cord as far as Windows 2003 is concerned. And they went strictly 2008 R2 with no support for 2003 at all. And that was actually probably twofold. One is that they do want to get away from 32-bit completely. They want to go completely 64-bit, and that was a good jump for that, as well as they had PowerShell, required PowerShell support, and PowerShell ships with 2008 and 2008 R2. 2008, it's a feature you have to flip on, but it is there. In 2008 R2, it's just there by default, unless you're server core, but that's a longer discussion. And PowerShell. So in Xendesktop 4, they did actually have a PowerShell SDK, but it wasn't default, and it was just basically a hijacking of MFCOM and all that stuff. And Xendesktop 5, because they had to redo the entire management infrastructure anyway, they built it all on top of PowerShell, which I am very happy about. Any questions so far? So we've talked a lot about the commandlets, so let's go ahead and take a look at them. That's really itty-bitty. You'll have this in your slides, so it's in your possession at some point. But if you do a git ps snap in registry, I guess I can just do that as opposed to. Is that a little better? Yes. Yeah, okay. So in PowerShell, there's a commandlet called git ps snapin. PS snapin tells you basically what snap-ins you are able to register or add into the current PowerShell namespace. In this particular case, these are the Citrix additions. So these are things from Citrix you can add into your current PowerShell session. Generally, not really all that important information. Most of you probably will never very much get into this because you normally just say, give me all of it, and I don't care about what's actually there. But if you ever care about doing it, there's AD identity snap-in, there's a broker, common, group policy. There's all different. They've broken up the commandlets into different groups. But this is all of them. So altogether, there are 290 commandlets. This is actually Xendesktop 5. I actually haven't done a count in Xendesktop 5.5. I think there's a few more in Xendesktop 5.5. Oops. There's 193 broker commandlets. So these are commandlets that directly have to do directly with changing and modifying the brokering behavior of Xendesktop. Some examples of this are git brokered controller. Knowing what we know about PowerShell, anyone want to guess what this does? Anyone? Yeah? Yeah? Did you raise your hand? No? Nobody, huh? Huh?
You win a t-shirt if you answer.
Oh, no, you'll have to take a t-shirt if you don't answer. I'm just kidding. Say again? It gets a broker controller. All right, so this is kind of how they've merged the concept of broker and DDC together. So now it's called a broker controller as opposed to a broker. Anyway, actually the reason why they did that is because they wanted to use, so I talked about prefixing and all that stuff, so Xenap. Instead of prefixing with like XD or something like that, what they decided to do was just use broker. So, so that broker controller, broker desktop, broker blah, 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 blah. Does this make sense? Yeah. So that's why a controller is the broker. Git broker desktop gets all your desktops that are brokered, just to kind of mix it up a little bit there. Git broker desktop group gets all your desktop groups. Oops, I keep clicking that. This guy right here, so this kind of bit me in the butt, and that's so I try to tell everybody about this. By default, in Xendesktop 5, I hope they changed this in 5.5. I think they did, because we gave them so much heck about this in 5.0. By default, when you import, when you use a hypervisor and you use the hypervisor to import your VMs into Xendesktop, it power manages them. And that means that stuff happens that you do not expect to happen, such as stuff powering down and powering up. And I'm like, it took me forever to figure out. I'm like, I would go in and I would turn all the VMs on, and then I would go in there and I'd be like looking for registration, and it'd be like all registered, and all of a sudden unregistered, unregistered, unregistered. What the heck just happened? And I would go back to the hypervisor, and sure as heck, stuff was shutting down. I'm like, I'd go turn it back on and go back to because you know I'm doing the standard Xendesktop thing. I want to see all my stuff registered before I start letting people connect. Anyway, so it turned out I'm like, why does this thing keep turning off my stuff? And I went through all the power schemes, and none of them really made any sense. So after several conversations with the product group, I came up with that command to just freaking disable power management altogether. It's like, don't power manage. I got it. Yes?
What happens if you haven't got anyone assigned to it? If you haven't got anyone assigned to a VM?
It'll power off.
Turns it off.
Yeah, yeah.
Turns one on
Well, that's just it. I wasn't doing one-to-one assignment. I was doing group assignment, right? So I just had a pool of desktops that I wanted to be able to throw people at. Yeah, it was frustrating as hell for the longest time until I figured out what the heck was going on. And I'm like, oh, disabling this. And it's so funny because me and Ron Oglesby had the same problem. And we're on the CTP alias trying to like, what the heck's going on? Stuff just keeps powering off. How do I tell it to stay on? So that's how you do it. If you type those two commands, this right here will basically say set my on to always. So for every 24, for every hour in a 24-hour period, I want you to set power management to disabled. And then the second one sets the buffer to 100%, which means that I want 100% availability 100% of the time. Make sense? That's what that does, if you care. We also have policy commandlets for desktop policy, import and export, which are always really useful. Any questions on those before we proceed to demo? Yes and no. I mean, they are technically group policies, but they're Xendesktop specific. Yeah. That's what that's talking about. Now, to be perfectly clear, you can export them, but you cannot look at them. They're binary. So what you're going to export is a binary blob. I believe that's correct. Am I thinking XenApp or am I thinking?
No, you're thinking correct.
Okay. Because one of them, they do it right, one of them, they don't do it right. Yes?
Can you import into another phone, do you know? Or does it have to be back into the same phone?
I think you can. I don't think you can. What you can't do is export, change, import. Right? I mean, that's not necessarily true. If you have the skill set of, say, someone like Pierre, you can go through and because it's a binary blob, but it's a translatable binary blob, right? If you know what you're looking for, you can find out where in that binary blob the property and value you're looking for is actually at and set the binary value in there. But that's a lot of work.
You'd have to be careful because some of the information.
Oh, careful is overrated.
Well, you might have a policy that sets the DVCs that you're beginning to register with. You don't want that.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to change that to a C instead of a D or something like that. Yeah, one little bit will screw you big time, yeah. You can do that, but yeah, the idea is that you don't necessarily have to. So, what happened? There it is. All right, so what I'm going to do is actually pick this up because I want to be able to look at you guys, but I need to be able to type. So do the get PS snap-in again here. The way that we would add snap-ins in PowerShell is just do you have two options. You could just do something like this, and that will add. So you can pipe from get PS snap-in to add PS snap-in, and add PS snap-in will add anything that comes in. You can also, if you want to be a little less specific, you can do something like this, and that will load any snap-ins that have Citrix in it. Or if you want to be very, very specific, you can just do that for each one. All right, but ideally, this is my preferred. My preferred is to pipe get ps snap-in and to add ps snap-in register. Now, the only thing to be wary of here is that if you have other snap-ins, such as the Quest stuff, the Exchange stuff, or SharePoint or some other product, if they have snap-ins registered, you will load those as well. That may not have any impact, or it may have impact. This is something you have to be wary of.
Check to see whether they're registered first and if not, they're registered.
Yeah, see, that's too much work. You can do that. So you can just do get. If you do get ps snap-in without the dash register, this will tell you what snap-ins are currently loaded. All right, so yeah, you could probably write a script to do some kind of detection. But the fact is you could just do this. Yeah. The EA0 means I know you're going to throw an arrow, so just I don't care. But I can sit there and do this all day long, right? It'll take a while the first time. But add ps snap-in has a function in it to say if the snap-in is already loaded, don't load it. Don't try to load it again. So when this eventually gets done, yay for virtual machines. What time's this session supposed to be over?
2:55.
Oh, I got 15 minutes? 20 minutes? 25 minutes? 30 minutes? Do I hear 40? No. Anyway, so I can do that over and over again. If I don't do the EA, it'll just complain that those were already loaded. If I do the EA, it'll just let you do it over and over again. So it doesn't really hurt. The only situation where that does can cause a problem is if you're doing a module instead of a snap-in, and the module has a format file. That you can get your format files can get all wonky if you keep messing with them. So let's look at what we have here. You can look at a command. You can find out what commands that you have by doing. In PowerShell v2 and above. So in v1, the only way to extend PowerShell was with the ps snap-in. And v2, they added the concept of the module. The big difference between a snap-in and a module is a module doesn't have to be binary. A snap-in absolutely had to be binary. A module does not have to be binary. It can just be a script. And a module can be loaded and removed at will. A snap-in actually had to be loaded into the .NET framework and had to be registered with in the GAC for PowerShell to be able to access that. And with a module, I can just do import module, remove module, and I can dynamically add and remove that stuff. Starting with v2 and above, modules, ps snap-ins were were deprecated. That's the word. They're still supported. Even in v3, they're still supported. But if you go to Microsoft or anyone that's like, no, you can't use snap-ins, you have to use modules. That said, in PowerShell v2, they added a parameter called module. So you can do get command module, showing you how you can get commands with noun or verb. In PowerShell v2 and above, you can just do get command module and give it the snap-in name or a snap-in wildcard, and it'll show you all the commands that match that, which is what I'm going to show you. Did you get all that? So you can also do stuff like goop verb. So that's all the commandlets. There's a big chunk of them. It has 22 add commandlets, 1 clear, 3 copy, 1 disconnect, 2 exports, 130 gets. Moral of the story is that there's a lot of stuff there. And the reason why there's a lot of stuff there is because the only way that you can do stuff in Xendesktop 5 and 5.5 is in PowerShell. Now you're saying, well, that's not true. I do stuff in the GUI all the time. Well, the fact is, even in the GUI, you're doing it in PowerShell. You may not know it, but you are. So if I come, this does not look so pretty. And How long has a resolution on laptops been like insane, right? When are projectors going to catch up? They're still doing 1024. That's like 15-year-old resolution. Anyway, sorry. Pet peeve. I just wish projectors could do more than 1024 by 768. Anyway, in this situation, this is the Xendesktop 5. This is actually 5.5. These are the desktop studio. If you look up here, I can't. And this little, we have a little PowerShell tab. Anytime you do anything in the GUI, you can go to the PowerShell tab, and it will show you the commands that you use to do this, right? So basically, and it gives you, although for some reason they decided that y'all care about Devi terms, right? So it gets the singleton site instance because, every admin knows what a singleton is. Anyway, this will basically tells you this gets the site instance, and if you go through, you're going to see that all of this data, everything in this box is how it dumped the config so that it could build this stuff over here, right? The cool thing is what you can do, especially if you're a consultant and you have like a standard config that you use, you can go into your lab, build the Xendesktop environment like you typically would add it, and then go into the tab, cut and paste that, and put it in a script file. And then from then on, next time you need to create a Xendesktop environment, you install Xendesktop, you open up PowerShell, you paste that script, or you run that script, and it'll perform those functions in the exact same order as you did them to come up with the same results. All right? And then if you want to, because again, not every environment is going to be exactly the same, in that same script, you can create parameters and values to say, for farm name, use this, and then in the script, you can do variables as opposed to the hard-coded strings. But the whole idea is that with Xendesktop 5, everything you need to know to learn as much as you possibly could about the Xendesktop environment and learning how to automate and create Xendesktop environments via script is in that little PowerShell pane. So let me show you. Trying to think. So let's create a desktop group. I think that's a catalog assignments here. That's what I thought. Physical is fine. Is it 3 or 4? 3? 3, 2, 1. 2. 2 is right, right? So I just want to do the 5, 6 ones because I know those aren't used. So I just created a catalog with those machines. Now I can create a desktop group assignment. If I only know how to type. So that's a lot of clicking, huh? Now if I go back to the Desktop Studio thing up here and go to PowerShell, this is all the stuff that it did. I'm getting there. All right, so this is what it used to create the catalog. All right. So when I created the catalog, that's the command that it typed. And then after that, it created the users, the domain users, to add them to the group. And then the very end, it created the desktop group and associated the two users, the user with a group. See? So if I wanted to, I can just take those 2 bits of script that I just did, put them in a different script and say, I want to create a desktop catalog. Or if, like for using Xendesktop 4 guys, it was so much more easy. It's so much more simple, so much simpler. That's the word I'm looking for. So much simpler in Xendesktop 4 to create desktop group mappings. You could actually just write a script to make it feel like it's the same thing, to create a catalog desktop group that are basically the same. Anyway, any questions there, Jason, before we go on?
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
You already, I was going to ask you about the snapping them on, but you already said it.
Yeah, it's because I'm smart stuff now. Anyway, any questions? Anything specific? Anything specific you would like to see? Question-wise, in the Xendesktop, Xen app, I don't care particularly, really, but PowerShell related, Xen app, Xendesktop.
If you wanted to take the PowerShell out of the console, or out of the Xendesktop
Mm-hmm.
console, and run it without the console, what sort of modifications would you need to make to it?
If you don't care about changing anything, you wouldn't have to make any modifications. I mean, literally, what happened is it ran exactly what you see. It was like someone went and typed it for you, but the code did it for you. So it will work. Obviously, it wouldn't work now, right? Because this stuff already exists in the brokered catalog configuration. But if you could go in there and delete it all. So let's do that. Well.
So if you wanted to do one catalog and desktop group through the console, but you had several to create, you could do it once through the console, copy it, make the changes in your text file, and keep on.
All right, so that actually it's not entirely true because I forgot about catalog ID and desktop group ID. So you would have to have. So if you did it at the command line. And you told it to create a catalog with the correct parameters, it would give you back that catalog object that it created with a UUID in it. You would have to capture that UUID because then later on when you create a user and you add a user to a desktop group in a catalog, it uses that ID to map the two. Does that make sense? So like that would be one of the things where it says catalog UUID 3. You can only use that at UUID once. So even if I went and deleted this from the configuration and then reran this, it would probably fail. So yeah, to answer your question, what you would need to do is make sure to make up my own words, variabilize the catalog UUID and the desktop UUID. But it's really easy to do because when you make the return of this command right here is a catalog object that has that value in it. So you would just say, $myCatalog equals pipe this, and then you could say new brokered machine catalog, and then do catalog UID would be $myCatalog.UID. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So that would be probably one change you definitely want to do. And then obviously machine name. The fact that they're incapable of translating a SID to a desktop name makes no sense to me. I have a script that's like 3 lines that does it. I'm like, here, use this. I'll give it to you for free. Free IP. There you go. All yours. But they use the SID instead of the machine name. It is what it is. Any other questions? It was a good question, by the way.
One that's come up in the past, maybe not so much as in desktop as in app, is remote object access. Remoting.
No. So, yeah. I hate remoting.
It's come up before.
Mhm.
I'm being the annoying
No.
audience member.
Yeah, I know. I asked him. So, by default, the remoting. So the XenApp guys, right? The XenApp guys and the Xendesktop guys were not talking, right? They weren't developing at the same time. And the XenApp guys had decided to use employ PowerShell remoting to be able to call these commandlets remotely. So in XenApp, if you wanted to run or create a PowerShell script that ran on your desktop to target a XenApp server, you would actually have to do a remote. You would have to use PowerShell remoting to make that happen, which has all kinds of double hop issues and authentication issues because it's all using Kerberos, and this machine can't get your ticket unless it has your password, and you don't pass your password. Anyway, long story short, it doesn't work all that well. In Xendesktop 5 and 5.5, that's not the case. Actually, a lot of the remoting is built into the commandlets, such as you'll see right here, there's a parameter called admin address. So you can actually, not legally, I mean, I don't know what the logistics ramifications of this are, but I can say from experience that I was actually able to convert the Xendesktop snap-in into a module. And then I could import that module anywhere I went without having to worry about whether Xendesktop was installed or the tools were installed. So that I could create, get brokered desktop from my desktop without having to go to the DDC. And using the admin connection, that just works. Does that make sense? Answer your question?
Yeah, and then also in XenApp 6.5, they've changed it quite a bit as well. They use Windows Communication Foundation, so it actually has which is a good thing. So it actually has a parameter for remote server. So if you want to manage a XenApp server from your desktop using PowerShell, like you said before, I've set up the remote object access in the prior versions, and it is a pain in the rear to do. So with the command line parameter for remote server, you can just specify that. That will go and communicate with WCF on the server and run the code there and spit back the objects to you. So it's much better now, but a lot of times the question is, can you do this from your desktop? You'll notice that Brandon's doing this from the server itself, but a lot of times you don't want to RDP to a server and do it. You just want to fire up PowerShell on your desktop and go, and it's getting a lot easier.
Are there any useful VDA side PowerShell objects you can leverage to do stuff like you used to do with the WF API?
We just went through this.
No. No. To Jason's point, so we do data collection on the VDA to get it up to the indexer for Sploak. So we have to collect Windows performance logs and ICA statistics and stuff like that. One of the things we wanted to have, because all our customers were saying, it'd be really nice to know what kind of device the user's connecting from. So the initial plan was a stupid one, which was to use, the client version. The problem is that having to maintain that table and make sure it's up to date and getting Citrix to provide any kind of value, any kind of valid table was impossible. They're like, we're not going to do it. We don't want to advertise the number of clients that we have out there, which is telling in itself. But in any case, I'm like, well, so how do I get this information? And he said, and it has to be possible, right? Because if I connect to Xendesktop on my iPad, it acts different than if I connect to it from an Android device or if I connect to it from a Windows box. And the fact is that the device does actually pass back what they call client product ID over the wire through the ICA channel to the VDA. So the VDA knows what features to turn on and off based on the functionality of the client. Anyway, all that to say, we were trying to figure out, well, that's great. We know the data's there. How do I get it? And we actually ended up having to do port ICA to get it out because there was no other. This was an oversight. I've talked to the Xendesktop guys already. They're like, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. That should have been passed back to the broker. So the broker maintains a list of data. So if you do go to a broker and you do get I keep saying XD because it's Xendesktop 4. And Xendesktop 5, if you do get brokered session, you will get a whole plethora of data about the VDA that the broker knows. And the VDA passes that back to the broker. What's missing is the client product ID.
They'll give you the client version, but not basically the flat.
Well, they'll give you the client versions for some products. Like iPhone, for some reason.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
like nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had to resort to WF API import ICA to do it.
So, sorry. No.
But they're gonna fix it. They're good.
Yeah, they are going to fix it. So,
I mean, desktop directory grabs a whole load of stuff.
Yeah.
That's not just with our own data. It gets stuff.
well, and to that point, with Xendesktop 5.5, it's less of an issue because all of it is exposed via WMI. So I can, and Xendesktop, if I was just saying I only will support Xendesktop 5, then we wouldn't have had to write the client product. We wouldn't have to write that code to get that data, because with WMI I can just get it from the WMI. There's from HDX. There's an HDX bond namespace, and there's a Citrix ICA namespace. They give you all the possibilities that you want. So if you're talking about just Xendesktop 5.5, you're pretty much smooth sailing. And going forward, it's going to be more and more and easier. But retro, you have to go with WF API. Sorry. Yeah, and it's not fun. It was fun for me because I didn't have to do anything. It's not fun for him.
Yeah, he made me do that.
Yes. I don't write code. Any other questions? So I guess I'm leaving. I'm done early then.
No, you're not. We're on time.
Oh. Woo!